The killer who was rescued before anyone knew what he had done. January 1982. Colorado, United States. A brutal snowstorm was sweeping across the Rocky Mountains. Thick snow covered the roads, icy winds howled through the valleys, and temperatures had dropped well below freezing. In those conditions, getting stranded in the mountains could easily become a death sentence. That same night, two young women, Annette Schnee and Barbara Jo Oberholzer, were trying to get home. Like many people at the time, they were hitchhiking and hoping that a kind driver would give them a ride. Unfortunately, the person who stopped for them was not kind. His name was Alan Lee Phillips. To anyone who saw him, Phillips looked like an ordinary man driving through the mountains. Nothing about him suggested that he was dangerous. But according to investigators, something horrifying happened after the women got into his vehicle. Police later believed that Phillips wanted power and control over the women. Evidence suggested that he attacked them and, when they resisted, he murdered them. He then drove into remote, snow-covered areas and left their bodies in the wilderness. As he got back into his truck, he probably thought he had committed the perfect crime. There were no witnesses, no security cameras, no cell phones, only snow, darkness, and silence. He likely believed that the storm would bury every clue and that no one would ever know what he had done. But fate had other plans. As Phillips drove away, the snowstorm grew worse. The roads became nearly impossible to navigate. Suddenly, his truck became stuck in deep snow. At first, he probably wasn't worried. He climbed out of the vehicle and tried to free it. He kicked snow away from the tires and pushed the truck with all his strength. Nothing happened. He tried again. Still nothing. Minutes turned into hours. The temperature kept dropping. The wind became even colder. His hands began to go numb. The realization slowly sank in. The man who had just taken two innocent lives was now trapped in the middle of nowhere, and might not survive the night himself. There was no traffic, no houses, no help. For the first time that night, fear may have entered his mind. He had escaped punishment for murder only to find himself facing death in a frozen wilderness. Desperate, Phillips began trying to attract attention. He flashed signals for help and used his vehicle's lights to send an SOS message. Then something happened that sounds like a scene from a movie. A small airplane happened to be flying over the area. By pure coincidence, a local sheriff was one of the passengers on board. Looking down through the storm, he noticed unusual flashes of light coming from below. First it seemed strange. Then he realized someone on the ground was signaling for help. The sheriff immediately contacted local authorities. Rescue teams headed into the dangerous weather and searched the area. After some time, they located a stranded driver beside a snow-covered vehicle. The man they rescued was Alan Lee Phillips. The officers had absolutely no idea who they were helping. To them, he was simply another motorist trapped in terrible weather. They got him to safety. They saved his life. No one there could have imagined that only hours earlier, the same man had allegedly murdered two young women. Meanwhile, the families of Annette Schnee and Barbara Jo Oberholzer were desperately searching for answers. Soon, the women's bodies were discovered. The entire community was horrified. Investigators immediately launched a murder investigation. Detectives interviewed witnesses. They collected evidence. They searched for suspects. They followed every possible lead. But this was 1982. DNA technology was still in its early stages, and investigators did not have the advanced forensic tools that exist today. They had evidence, but they could not connect it to a specific person. Months passed, then years, eventually decades. The case became what investigators call a cold case. Many people believed the killer would never be found. But evidence has a strange way of waiting. Nearly 40 years later, detectives decided to reopen the case. By then, forensic science had changed dramatically. Investigators retested the evidence collected in 1982 and developed a DNA profile of the killer. First, they checked criminal DNA databases. No match. The killer's DNA was not there. The investigation seemed stuck once again. Then detectives tried something different. They used familial DNA. This method does not require a direct match. Instead, it looks for people who share parts of their genetic information with the unknown suspect. Investigators searched databases where people had voluntarily submitted DNA samples to learn about their ancestry and family history. Suddenly, they found something. The DNA did not point directly to Alan Lee Phillips. Instead, it pointed toward several people who appeared to be distant relatives of the killer. That small clue changed everything. Detectives began building family trees. They studied birth records, marriage records, addresses, family connections, one branch after another, one name after another. Slowly, the list of possible suspects became smaller and smaller. Eventually, one name kept appearing: Alan Lee Phillips. Now detectives had a suspect, but suspicion alone was not enough. They still needed proof. Investigators quietly obtained a fresh DNA sample from Phillips. The sample was sent to the laboratory. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Scientists compared the new DNA sample with the DNA evidence collected from the murders in 1982. The result came back. It was a match. After nearly 4 decades, investigators finally knew the identity of the killer. As detectives reviewed old records, they made one final, astonishing discovery. They found documents describing a stranded driver during the snowstorm on the very night of the murders. A man had become trapped in deep snow. A sheriff had spotted his SOS signal from an airplane. Rescue teams had saved him. The name on that report was the same name that appeared in the DNA investigation: Alan Lee Phillips. The room reportedly fell silent. The truth was almost impossible to believe. 40 years earlier, law enforcement officers had unknowingly rescued the very man they had been searching for. The snowstorm had nearly claimed his life, but fate gave him another 40 years. In the end, however, the freezing mountains, the passing decades, and all his secrets could not protect him. 'Cause sometimes justice takes years. Sometimes it takes decades. But sometimes all it needs is a few tiny pieces of DNA and one incredible coincidence to finally find its way home.